Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm speaking with Lindsay Burr. Lindsay is CEO of the Yarbrough Group. Her career has focused on helping people clearly see and then navigate the systems that they're in. She has worked in international political spaces and in U.S. policy and elections. And in all of her work over the last 15 years, she has used polarity theory, a tool developed by Barry Johnson and expanded by multiple authors. Lindsay uses her knowledge of polarity thinking to help individuals, groups, and organizations achieve goals that are tied to meaningful work. I'm very eager to learn more about polarity thinking from Lindsay because based on the small introduction I've already had, my strong feeling is that it's a tool that can help us see, understand, and calibrate our leading and following to very specific group contexts. So, Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It is my absolute pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Well, I'm really, as I said, eager to share this with listeners. So I wonder if you can start us off by just giving a brief introduction to polarity thinking so that we're kind of in your world, so to speak.
Absolutely. The way I tend to come at polarities is to think about we're all good at problem solving. We all have been taught how to problem solve from the time that we're little, but then we hit these unsolvable problems. Sometimes they're called wicked problems or dichotomies. And for me, I use the term polarities. The idea that two truths are both true at the same time. And you need both for the health of the system, the dynamic, the team, the person. And if you pick just one, you'll ultimately get the downside. So one of the most obvious ones we use is activity and rest. We talk a lot about work-life balance and we struggle with that, but at the end of the day, it's activity. What do I need to do to feel accomplished? Rest. What do I need to do to feel rejuvenated? And if I pick just activity, I get burnout. If I pick just rest, I get fused to the couch with nothing left to watch on Netflix, I think. And so we need both. And that's the best example to me of a key polarity. And once we start to see them, we solve for the polarity, not for one or the other.
Thank you so much for that visceral example. I think I often tend to use this general word like balance, when I come into these conversations, but seeing it as a polarity, as you said, it's just so much clearer. And then the problem-solving process itself totally changes. So that's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
Something that's come up on the podcast many times before is that in the mainstream discourse, at least here in the US, the leader-follower conversation tends to get set up as leadership is good and followership is bad. This whole be a leader, not a follower type of slogan. And it's a real challenge for those of us who advocate for followership to be valued and studied. So I wonder how you might think about this challenge through the polarity lens.
I'm so glad you framed it this way because I hit this wall when I got asked to come to the followership conference in Glasgow. I was like, why? Because leadership. And it was such a great stopping point because I had always framed leadership as you lead the team and you lead yourself at the end. So when I realized leadership and followership were a polarity, I was surprised at how much it shifted how I was viewing leadership and how one-sided the view had been. Because when you look at leadership, you can't have leaders without people that are following. I wrote an article on the polarities of leadership. And going to this conference has shifted how I'm looking at it because really the same polarities show up for followers, but they are articulated in a different actions. So I was thinking about reflection and action. Leaders need to reflect and take action. So too do followers need to reflect and take action. Expert and learner is a key polarity. Leaders need to be experts and be open to learning. And so too do followers need to know what they're experts in and know what they need to learn. And so when both people are thinking about both of those sets of polarities, the system gets so much healthier.
I love how you're describing your own moment of insight here around the actual behaviors involved in group work. And I just want to jump in to point listeners to a previous episode with Dr. Chris Fusi, who also discusses behaviors that are common between leading and following roles. And I'll link that in the show notes.
I was also thinking about how there are times when a leader will hold one pole and the followers would hold another pole. And it may be in directive and participative. When you're rolling out something new, the leader needs to say, here's what we're doing. And the followers might be more participating in making that vision come true. But at the same time, the leader has to have gotten buy-in from someone before rolling something out, usually, if they want it to be successful. And the followers have to be able to say, this is what's real, and be directive about this is what's possible. So I just loved adding this lens when we think of it, leadership and followership as two positives that work together. You get so much more richness when it comes to who are we as a team? Who are we as a group? Who are we as a family or a company or a partnership? And it can really apply in all of these different settings.
I'd like to make a comment here because I want to make sure I'm getting it all.
Yes, great.
You gave several examples of polarities that might line up with leading and following roles. And what it sounds like to me is that those polarities can be expressed in several different ways. So one way is based on behaviors or skills. You gave the example of reflection and action, what you're doing in this group or situation. And I think that's pretty intuitive for a lot of us. And then you also gave an example of a polarity that might be based on a persona, like being the expert or being the learner. So who are you in this group in any situation? And then there's also this possibility of a polarity being based on a value or a quality, like being directive or being participatory. How are you being in this moment or this situation? And how does that line up with your vision of yourself as a leader or follower or just a member of the team? So even that earliest example in our conversation of action and rest, that almost sounds a little to me like a value-based polarity. Maybe the leaders, maybe the designated leaders in the group are holding the pole of action and saying, we need to be more productive, which is such a typical management way of thinking, right? But then the followers in the group could be holding the pole of rest and saying, we need to be sustainable and map out this work in ways that will not exhaust us. So that's all very interesting to me and kind of deepens this conversation about polarities to know that when people work together, they're almost always going to be holding poles together, and that those poles can actually go beyond just skill sets or behaviors, which I think is where we typically look for them.
Yes, they are going to be holding poles together. And one of the things I would add to the example that you gave about people holding one side of a polarity, as soon as it's a but, yes, but, or either or, then it sets up the conflict. So activity and rest could be a really elegant polarity for a group to hold together. So of course we need to take action. Of course we're here to create product or output or whatever. And of course we need to be rested enough to be able to create the output. So as soon as management is saying, yeah, but we have to activity, and the other group is saying, yeah, but we have to rest, you've already set up getting the downside, because the management will so over prefer burnout, and the other group will resist so much that things grind to a halt. So then nothing moves. So no one gets what they want. So the key is figuring out how do we both get the upside of both. It's harder with activity and rest. A really good one to use in a corporate setting is mission and margin. So it's like the mission of the organization. This comes up in nonprofits a lot, or the margin. Are we making enough money? And the creative team will ideate, and the accounting team will say, what does it cost? And so those are two functions that you need. And when they work together, it's amazing. You can create incredible things within the budget. When it's set up as an either or, and I worked with a company that did this, they didn't bring in accounting early enough. So by the time the ideas were set in motion, they were too expensive and they started losing clients. So the different functions in a company might hold different pieces of a polarity. Individuals might, and as soon as it's an either or, you'll start to get the downside. So that as long as everyone knows that it's not adversarial, it's both and, then you can figure out how much you need of which one for success.
Thank you. Yes. And thank you for pointing this out in the language. I've started catching myself more and more since, we've had this chat, and it is remarkable how unconscious it is. Right. And you're right. Just by saying the word but or either, you're immediately mentally in opposition, and just the habit of saying and it shifts at least I'll speak for myself, like it shifts my entire orientation, both like cognitively, but also like a bit emotionally, like I'm even more interested in the other point of view, the other pole, when I just say the word and. It's remarkable. So quick tip, start practicing saying and whenever you're tempted to say but.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch groups start to police themselves about halfway through a full day training. Like, because I give a lot of grace for the first 2 hours because we're so steeped in but, right? Because we get taught if I say and, then they'll think I'm agreeing with them and I've lost my ground or whatever. And so about halfway through the day, or a couple hours in, I start correcting people. And by halfway through the afternoon, the group will start going, and be like, you said but. It really does shift the whole group. I love you expressing how it affects you internally too. That's so powerful.
Yes, I really do feel it as a physiological change. And I suspect if listeners tune into their own bodies when they make this shift from but to and, they will also feel it. So there's another quick tip for everyone. And speaking of feeling things, could you give us an example, Lindsay, of how you have brought polarity thinking into a leadership and followership situation?
I was coaching a client recently who's the executive director of a pretty large organization, and they're about to go through a lot of change. And they were struggling with how to think about and frame their role with a new board chair. How will this new board chair affect things, while also sorting through what it means to have someone that's new who doesn't have the same history but has some knowledge. So change with internal consistency as well. And we landed on there's a way to have the conversation where the executive director is very clear, this is my role, right? This is my role as a leader of the staff. This is my role as an onboarder for the new chairperson. And of course, I follow the lead of the new chair because we're doing, and to use your words, I think beautifully, like a new dance, right? We're new partners in this dance. And there are times when one will lead because they have the institutional knowledge, or the other will lead because they are trying to make change in a different way. And adding that lens of leadership and followership gave us such a clearer path for how that they could talk to themselves about it going into this change and talk to the new board chair. It hasn't happened yet, so it's in a couple of weeks. So I'll let you know. It was such an unlocking moment of, instead of trying to figure out, well, I need to prove I'm the leader, or, well, I need to just follow whatever they say. That's a great description of the two downsides, right? When you decide you're only a leader, you'll strong arm people until you have no one left to lead. If you decide you're only a follower, people don't know why you're there because you're either yesing everything or, um, you know, you don't put any stakes in the ground to say, this is what I think, whether it's done or not. But that value piece of what value are we adding and when do I shift between the two roles? It really broke open our conversation.
I actually think that particular dance, the executive director and board or CEO and board, is a really cool one to explore in terms of leading and following. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the upside and downside of a polarity. That's something I realize it's hard to describe verbally without the visual diagram, but it was such an epiphany for me to see that every single polarity you could possibly imagine, in fact, has an upside and a downside. It just makes the world go from two-dimensional to three-dimensional in an instant.
Yes, that's great. So the way to think about it is that if you think about it on paper, that there's a left pole and a right pole, that just helps, to your point, give it a place in space. So there's the left pole and the right pole, and each one has an upside and each one has a downside. There are a lot of phrases in English around when your best skill becomes your downfall, or when you overdo something, or
Greatest strength is greatest weakness.
yes, exactly. Yes. So those are to me examples of someone picked one pole in a polarity and then so overdid it that they got the downside. So if something is a polarity, it's ongoing, it's interconnected, you're going to have to keep dealing with both, and you pick just one, you'll get the upside for a while and then it gets overdone and you get the downside. One that I worked for a long time was confidence and humility. So I prefer confidence. Big fan. um, so when you're confident, it's feels good and strong and clear and powerful. And I felt like I could walk into any room and didn't question why I was there, or I didn't know what imposter syndrome felt like for a really long time because I'm confident. And then it gets overdone, right? Arrogant, rude, my way is the only way, kind of those blinders on to what anyone else might think or say. The polarity that goes with confidence is often phrased as humility. And when I hear the term, or when I used to, that's a slip up because I do still do this sometimes. When I hear the term humility, I think doormat. Like, to me, it is the downside, it is doormat, it is opinionless, it is, taken advantage of, and martyr. So do you hear how, like, I love the upside of confidence and I see the downside of humility?
Yeah, that for me resonates with that leadership is good, followership is bad type of thing. There's four quadrants. I'm only seeing like the top left and the bottom right or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so the is that there's a beautiful upside to humility. And that's how you get out of the downside of the one you've overdone. So again, imagining that confidence is on the left, humility is on the right. The upside of confidence is above that in the upper left. The downside of confidence is the overdone bottom left. I can't get back up to the upside of my preference unless I shift to the upside of humility. Because if I keep overdoing confidence, I'll just get deeper and deeper into the downside. And as soon as I made friends with the upside of humility and realized that I embody it in making space for people, asking real questions, engaging people wherever they're at, like asking what they're understanding and adding more, or inviting people and welcoming them, it unlocked my relationship with humility. And it meant that under stress, under stress will always choose our preference again, right? That under stress, I could pause and say, how might I show up with the elements of humility that I really care about? And how might I make sure that I show up with the elements of confidence that I really care about? I'm not going to overcorrect so much that I become the downside of humility, the lower right quadrant, which is the opinionless doormat. Like, you've met me, we've spent a little time together. the chances of me overshooting over to that quadrant are very low. So, how do I get the upside of both? And here's one other piece that I'm not sure you and I have talked about as much, which is if you pick just one, then over time, you get the downside of the one you've chosen, and then you get the downside of the opposite as well. So your worst fear ends up becoming true. And so for me, back in the day, it would have been swinging back and forth between arrogant, over loud, right, bully, and weird, wishy-washy, wet blanket, passive. And I was there for a little while.
I thought of another one of those phrases that I've heard before, and tell me if this fits: generous to a fault.
Yes.
And that's something I feel like I've dipped into before, like prioritizing other people's needs or desires like so much that then I get resentful, right? And then I just get the downside of whatever the other one is. I don't know. You get nothing then. It's all for me. Like a reaction.
Yeah, what you've just described beautifully is the meta pole of polarity of self and other. So it's like we other, resentful, swing back, and we don't swing to the upside of self. We, like what you just described, we swing right back around to the downside of self, which is fine. Then I'm cutting you off and I'm not even giving you the address because you find your own way home, right?
Yeah, I can totally see myself there. I do it less now because I have worked a lot on it, but I can definitely relate. So thank you for that. And I'm sure listeners can find their own version of that they've experienced in the past.
I hope so. And what a polarity lens starts to add is that it's not hopeless, right? That if you have something you've overdone, when you find the other side of the pole, the other polarity that goes with it, then you know how to right yourself. And it's not doing the same amount of both. It's how much of each might I need for this situation. So with self and other, it's not now I'm not going to pay attention to other people until I start to feel selfish. It's no, how do I care for others? How do I care for myself? I love the uplift of hope that it gives when you see that it partners with something.
Yeah, it really does. And there's that like feeling of, oh, it feels so integrative. It's like seeing a new world almost. Like, oh, I don't have to just bounce between these things. I can move up, right, to this whole other dynamic where there's just so much relief, right, where I get to have both. Beautiful.
Yes. One author called, I think it's Tim Arnold, says, seeing is relieving.
Yeah, I love that. Seeing is relieving. So since we've expanded the lens a little bit, I know that this structure you're describing, sometimes it's called a polarity map.
There is a tool that is a polarity map. It's a one page, and I can give you the link to a downloadable one for my webpage.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes. And I know this is just the beginning of how this way of thinking works, but maybe give listeners a sense of how they might use something like a polarity map or just mapping a polarity with good and bad in their work or in their community or sort of in some other realms of practice.
So the way that you use a polarity map, or the way that I tend to use it, is you got to ask the question, is it a polarity? Get to the point where you're either on your own or with whoever you're using it with, agree that the two pole names are neutral to positive. So it would never be like good and evil or lazy and burnout. It would be activity and rest, or
mission and margin.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So you agree that they're both good, even if you don't love them equally, but that they're both neutral to positive words. Then I tend to populate the quadrants above and below the pole names. So it's the qualities that go in those quadrants, the qualities of what the experience is, how you feel, how other people feel around you. And when you're populating the downsides, the overdone part, it's good to think about, when the other pole is neglected, when we almost forget it exists, or what would you call someone who only does this? And it makes it a little bit richer when you're not trying to do the self-edit of, well, I don't do that. But you can kind of dump it out like, well, what does someone else do? There's another step sometimes where you kind of refine it even more, but usually that gives you enough of a picture to say, okay, we all agree that these quadrants represent what we're going for. Then there's also the greater purpose statement at the top of the map, which tells you, like, why are we doing this? Why is this worth doing? Because when you have such a strong preference, so when I have a strong preference for confidence, why would it matter to integrate humility? Well, because I want to be an authentic leader. I want to be an inspired leader. The deeper fear at the bottom, what is worth leveraging this for? Like, well, I don't want to fail, or I don't want to let people down, or you can make it funny too. I don't want to be leading a solo parade down a side street that no one's heard of, right? Like, I tend to make things funny. So you put that in and you try to get as much agreement as possible. And then you can re-engage our problem solving to say, what do we need or what do I need to have be the upside, to keep me in the upside of both of these? And then what are my early warnings for the fact that I'm overdoing it?
Nice. Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking of Ira Chalif's polarity. I mean, I think I would call it this. Tell me if you agree. He, in The Courageous Follower, describes followership actions on a spectrum from support to challenge in relation to the leader. And then there's, many ways to do both of those. And then it's, your job to sort of navigate along that spectrum based on the context and the situation. If I said to myself, okay, I'm a follower and I just support, and I'm fully like on the supporting side, I can imagine pretty quickly how that turns into, just yes, 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 say whatever, don't, question anything, and goes into that sort of sheep mode, stereotype. On the other hand, right, if I decide I'm just a challenging follower, I'm going to like make sure nothing gets by me and I don't accept anything without a fight, then I just become like an obstructionist, right? And like nothing happens. And everyone hates me in the group because I'm just always causing trouble. But clearly, both of those things have a really strong upside, right? Like a leader of a group or a group itself can't get anything done without everyone supporting, right, each other in the mission. So that's got to be there, right? And also, we need to have the challenging, because what if, someone says, well, let's step off this cliff. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I think we should turn left. That's an important challenge, right? So that you don't make a really bad decision or cross an ethical boundary or even just, miss a deadline or something. So I can see how both of those need to be there too. I don't know. What's your take on that? Am I oversimplifying it?
Absolutely not. What I love about anytime there's a spectrum, I tend to twist it into a polarity loop, which is an infinity loop that's kind of wonky, where it's a little more elongated on the top. So the idea is that you're getting more of the upside and less of the downside. So if we think of support and challenge on a spectrum, but then twist it into the polarity loop, you have the upside of support. I jump in, I'm a team player. I say yes when I can. I cheerlead myself and others and, my followers and my leader. And then you have the upside of challenge, which is I question things that make me feel a little confused or ethically questionable, or I'm not jumping off any cliffs, because this is usually, let's put it in the context of a job, right? It's a job. I'm not going to do something that I'm not willing to do. So when we instead ask, where do I lie on the spectrum, and say, what do I support and what do I challenge, or how do I show up in these ways, we give ourselves a roadmap for how to do both, which usually settles ourselves when we have a really strong preference between them. So if you tend to be more of a supporter, to think of challenging, if you really prefer supporting, you'll see challenging as just the downside that you described, the overdone challenging, and vice versa. If you really prefer challenging, you'll see following as just wandering off the cliff, like, or the support side is that. So it's like, how do I as a follower show up and support and challenge? And then we have this beautiful roadmap for ourselves that doesn't have to be the same as anybody else's, but gives ourselves some kind of toeholds for how do I like to show up. So then people get to show up so much more authentically because they're not in this internal conflict.
It's so practical. I'm really excited about polarity maps, and I hope listeners are too. I know it's a little hard to visualize, but we will put that link in the show notes. So thank you for giving us the visual. Anything else you'd like to share about polarity thinking, or how this has kind of changed your view of social political issues, maybe, you know, the kind of landscape around you in general as you go through your life?
Yes, I would say that once I started seeing polarities, it's really hard to not see them. And so when other people get into conflicts, it's kind of funny because I'm like, right, it's both. And they're like, oh, when you're thinking of it as both and when it's appropriate, you get a whole lot of different types of answers. So I would say personally, it has been very, very helpful. I usually do a yearly polarity map. And one year it was holding on and letting go. Like, what do I need to hold on to? What do I need to let go of? And it was profound. It had a profound impact on my life. So I take this very personally. And then I also look at polarities showing up in international political dynamics and domestic, because my background is in politics, both domestic and international, and political development. And so I did a keynote on tradition and modernity in Tunisia following the Arab Spring and how they navigated that polarity much more smoothly than its neighbor Egypt, which fell back into conflict. In Tunisia, they had created a new constitution, had an election, had a very traditional group get more of the election seats. And Egypt had the same thing happen. When Egypt went back into conflict, Tunisia said, whoa, let's pause, let's redo this. And everybody agreed, and they were successful for much longer. And the group that did that won the Nobel Peace Prize that year. I don't think they would have said we're navigating tradition and modernity as a polarity, but like I could see it in the way they were coming at it. Looking on the domestic side of things, when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, we talked about self and other as a meta polarity. Part and whole is another meta polarity, that we as a whole are a community and we are made up of different parts, right? And without the different parts, the whole would not be the whole that it is. And the dominant groups that are in power see the whole and say, well, of course everyone feels included. And the parts that are marginalized do not feel that. So you have Black Lives Matter evolve as a response to this part is being harmed at greater rates, and this is something we need to talk about. But then the whole responds with All Lives Matter, which wasn't really about we need to make sure everyone is safe. It was the dominant group's point of view should be reinforced. And then you see the breakout piece of Blue Lives Matter, and again, the response is like, of course, police lives matter. I think it should be. Of course, Black Lives Matter. How do we make sure that the parts feel like they are supported by the resources of the whole? And so you can almost see the social movement call and response through different polarity lenses. Self and other came out a lot during COVID. You know, what do I as an individual, what am I willing to sacrifice for the whole? And it was different answers at different times, which led to some really problematic outcomes across the US and globe. But when we can talk about it as self and other, or part and whole, it's not either Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. It's how do we all feel supported by the system that we're in? Or how might we shift the system to support people? So I just think that it's an intellectually fascinating dynamic to apply retrospectively to things, but also you can look at things as they're unfolding. There are some communities that have really used this very specifically and very well. Charleston, South Carolina, has integrated polarity thinking in a lot of the different levels, thanks to Margaret Seidler. There's also been a lot of work on homelessness in Canada with Tim Arnold. So there are a lot of people who have used polarities to really champion social change.
I can already feel it's a way to expand my imagination. And I personally feel like, you know, any sort of solution comes from that capacity. You know, it's when we turn off our imagination or, you know, get stuck in one of these sides or positions that we literally just can't see anything else. And so we kind of keep like bouncing back and forth. And, you know, that's, I think, when you get into those conversations that seem hopeless and just always the same, like repetitive arguments. But as soon as you say, what's the polarity? As soon as you ask, okay, what's the polarity in this conflict? Who's representing what and what are they protecting or what are they advocating for? Then you can start seeing the polarity, or you can start seeing the both and asking yourself different questions.
One of the tricky things about polarities is as soon as we hear the concept and kind of get it, we tend to think, oh yeah, I got it. And off we go. And we get into it a little bit and then tend to hit a wall of either I don't know the next step or I don't know how to use this. And so therefore it's just interesting. It's not useful. And I really encourage people, if they download the map and are working through it and hit a wall, please reach out. I don't want it to fall to the wayside because you ran into a wall and didn't quite know the next step because it seemed easy before. And the other one thing is there's still a place for either or. We tend to need either or when we are deciding what to have for breakfast. My 2-year-old is like, I want both pancakes and waffles. I understand that. And we are having one or the other.
Indeed. Point well taken. Sometimes it really is either pancakes or waffles. Lindsay, thank you so much for giving us this tiny but mighty window into the power of polarity thinking, both within the leading and following context and beyond. I wonder what's coming up next for you.
I'm actually really excited because the end of June, I'll be at the Creative Problem Solving Institute leading a 4-day session on polarities and creativity. It's the immersion track, so it'll be 4 mornings and the afternoon is for other sessions. But I'm really excited because it's neat to see the overlap of polarities in different contexts because different ones get illuminated depending on where you are. If you're working in cybersecurity, transparency and confidentiality come out. If you're working in theater, like audience experience and performer experience is one that comes out. So it's fascinating to see it shift based on the context that you're sitting in.
Wonderful. What a great opportunity and what a great place for this work. I will add that Creative Problem Solving Institute link to the show notes for sure. And finally, Lindsay, how can listeners get in touch with you directly and learn more about your work?
Website is Yarbrough Group, YARB group.com, short for the Yarbrough Group. And that has a way to get in touch with me. And also you can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Burr, BURR.
Perfect. Thank you once again. And I very much look forward to our next conversation. You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music. And a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.